All right, I want to share with you some strategies for helping kids to make the T or the D sound. Now, whether you are just wanting to help your child learn these sounds and keep their speech development on track, or if they're having kind of a hard time making these sounds and you want to just give them an extra boost and to be able to make these sounds and say words with these sounds, either way, these strategies can help you out, and they're ones that you can easily use at home. And the T and the D are made in the same place in the mouth, which is why they are commonly taught together. And so I'll go through and I'll show you how to make these sounds and the slight difference to be able to make a T versus a D. So starting out, let's talk about how to make a T sound. Now, in order to be able to make a T sound, what needs to happen is the tongue tip needs to come up and it needs to be touching the alveolar ridge, which is right behind the teeth. So when I'm teaching this to kids, first off, I want to make sure that they know where the tip of their tongue is. And so I'll point that out and tell them, all right, we're going to be working on the T sound. And what we need to do is we're going to use the tip of our tongue. Find the tip of your tongue. You're going to touch the top of your mouth right behind your top teeth. There's a bumpy spot up here, right here. So see if you can use the tip of your tongue to find that bumpy spot right up here behind your teeth. And once you find it with the tip of your tongue, you're just going to make a little tapping motion. Okay, so now that we know what the tongue needs to be doing in order to make a T sound, I want to share with you 3 different tips that are going to help your child get their tongue in place if they're having a hard time and they're making errors when trying to do that. And as I'm sharing these 3 different tips with you, just know that you don't necessarily need to practice each of these with your child. It's just to give you options so that you can play around and see which one works best for your child. So tip number 1 is to help get their tongue forward. A common mistake that we'll see for kids that have a hard time making the T or the D sound is that their tongue is coming back and making a k or a g sound. So what we want to do is make sure that their tongue is coming forward and the tip is coming up again to touch that ridge. So if your child is having a hard time being able to get their tongue forward and up to touch the alveolar ridge, a couple things that you can do is 1, you can put something like peanut butter up on the ridge up there so that they can easily find it with the tip of their tongue. And then they can just practice holding their tongue there for a little bit just to get used to where their tongue needs to be. Another thing you could do is use something like a tongue depressor or a small little sucker so that you are touching the ridge and showing their tongue where to go. A different mistake that we might see if kids are having a hard time making the T sound is if they're making the D sound instead. And what is happening in this case is the vocal folds are vibrating and we want to turn those off. So tip number 2 is to have your child whisper the T sound. So again, if your child is using the D instead of the T, then we're just going to coach them on how to turn the vocal folds off. And you'll say, okay, we're going to whisper and see if we can get a T sound. Because naturally when we whisper, it's going to help to turn our voice off or to make it so our vocal folds aren't vibrating. So if you put your hand to your neck, you can feel, if you do a D, 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 you can feel that vibration as opposed to a T, T, T. And to help your child feel the difference, you can have them put their hand on their throat to see when they do a T versus a D and how that feels. And step number 3 is to use different visual cues. A hand cue that I like to use, and this is to encourage that tapping motion, is I'll put my finger up by my mouth, and as I make the sound, I'll go t, 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 t. And once your child is starting to figure out how to move their tongue and they're able to get a few productions of the t, then you can make it fun. And another cue that you can use is like a drumming motion. T, t, t. Again, to kind of encourage that tapping sound. T, t, t. Another cue that sometimes people will use is the movement of the clock. So like t, 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 t. And then if you're needing to work on the D sound, the good news is it is made the exact same way as the T. The only slight differences is, like we talked about, the vocal folds are going to be on. You're going to have that vibration. D, d, d. So a helpful cue that I would suggest is you can have your child put their hand on their throat to help them feel if it's vibrating or not. D, d, d. All right, and once your child has figured out how to make this sound, we want to make sure that we're practicing and doing it several times because the tongue is a muscle. And the great news is to get lots of repetition in, there are so many different ways that we can make this fun and engaging. I have a whole playlist for you that is activities for busy parents where I show you lots of different ways to either do it during play, to use games to practice, or to find ways that you can get a little bit of practice in during your daily routines so that you're not adding on an additional task to your already busy day. So make sure that you check that out, and it's linked in the description below. And one last helpful tool that I love to share with parents is my video for levels of prompting. And what this does is it shows you how to take any speech sound and start out by giving your child the max amount of support so that you are telling them and showing them exactly what to do and they're doing it with you. And then gradually you start to fade that support so that they go from needing the max amount of support and coaching from you to eventually being able to do it with minimal to no help at all. Then once your child is starting to make the T or the D pretty confidently on their own with need for minimal support from you, then you can try moving on to step 2, which is working on the T or the D at the syllable level.